Thank you again, everyone, for coming. I'm really excited to finally come and see this come to fruition. It's just been a really wonderful conference, and I'm really impressed by everything that's been presented so far. I'm also very excited to hear Beth Lane speak about this documentary film, UnBroken. So I'm very excited to welcome Beth Lane. She is an award-winning director, producer, and writer whose work is grounded in a deep commitment to storytelling on a vehicle for empathy and connection. A second-generation Holocaust survivor, her artistic and creative practice is shaped by a desire to build bridges and create spaces for reflection and dialogue that lead to understanding. She is a trained actress, singer, and dancer, and she brings a multidisciplinary approach to the work across film, her performance, and engagement. She's also been invited as a keynote speaker, curator, and participated in panels worldwide, and has a weekly live Instagram series, Banter with Beth. She is also the founder of the Weber Family Foundation, which she seeks to combat anti-Semitism, bigotry, and hate through artistic engagement and storytelling across media. Her film Unbroken, which we will learn more about today, has received several awards and is her director debut and the foundation's inaugural project. And she also will be joined by Adam Milstein and Max Kaminsky for musicians, but please join me in welcoming Beth Lane.
Thank you, Catherine. It was Bashert, I think, that we met at the Fowler Museum at some kind of a gathering. I don't remember even what it was. It was an open house, and we just started chatting, and it was really it was just Bashert that we met. So here we are. This is going to be completely different from what you have been experiencing the last 2 days. And I'm thrilled to be here to really talk to you about identity and memory as it relates to how I built UnBroken. So let's just dive into it. In 1966, my grandparents, Sylvia and Maury, were hosting a rather grand party at their city club. The Standard Club was our home away from home, nestled on a one-block street in the Loop, downtown Chicago. It was a Jewish club, but I have memories of attending holiday parties with gingerbread houses and blue and white Christmas ornaments. My grandparents hired a marvelous dance orchestra for this festive bash, as was the custom, but no one was dancing to the music of Benny Goodman, George Gershwin, Irving Berlin, and so many of the other American popular songs that became a great musical tradition, trailblazed by Jewish emigres. All of the guests in suits and taffeta were in a corner doing what, you might ask? Apparently, there was a 3-year-old little girl in crinolines and patent leather shoes dancing and singing for everyone. And you've probably guessed it. That little girl was me. I would continue to dance and sing both in and after school. My mother was the local ballet teacher who had a studio in her pal Teresa's red garage. Our classes were accompanied by a German pianist, a small round man who always wore a suit and tie, quiet and stern. Mr. Heinze was my first introduction to Chopin, Beethoven, and Rachmaninoff. Eventually, when I was old enough, I would attend summer sleepaway camp in the northern woods of Interlaken, Michigan. Enrolled as an actress and dancer at the National Music Camp, it was easy to daydream between pliés and ronde-jambs, transfixed by the sun, glistening on the waters of the piney shores of Pine Lake and Duck Lake. But the most magical part of those summers was walking through the woods, listening to musicians in practice rooms. They were in cabins rehearsing and honing their craft, making memories. Sunday evenings, the entire camp, counselors and campers alike, would gather in Kresge Auditorium to listen together to the World Youth Symphony Orchestra. My parents' LP record albums would become realized in the live orchestral performances of Mahler, Mendelssohn, and Copland, to whom my fellow dance majors and I would perform contemporary ballets. I grew up attending Hebrew school once a week. My family observed all the major Jewish holidays, yet my identity as a student, a camper, an actress, dancer, and singer, my identity was not identifiably Jewish. I just was Jewish, in the same way that I have auburn hair and brown eyes. I mean, the hair needs a little assistance these days, but my family had some hidden truths. Not secrets per se, but in hiding was my dad's surname, changed from Levy to Lane in 1935. I never knew my grandparents as Levys, only Lanes. I also learned my mother was adopted, for example. These were not things to hide. My mother's adoptive parents were Spiegels, but not the Oy vey Spiegels. My grandfather was the president of the Neurological Society of America, and my grandmother was a painter and a sculptor. On occasion, my Hebrew school youth group would break out into song on weekend retreats. My brother and I would spend most afternoons just before dinner time transfixed by TV shows like The Three Stooges, The Marx Brothers, The Honeymooners, and Carl Reiner's The Dick Van Dyke Show. After dinner, Gilligan's Island, The Brady Bunch, and of course, Norman Lear's All in the Family were fixtures in our family room. Saturday mornings, we would devour hours of cartoons, listening to Rocky and Bullwinkle, Fritz the Cat, and of course, Mel Blanc giving voice to Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, the Wile E. Coyote. The slapstick sounds of the sonic worlds composed to tickle our funny bones would become the bedrock of muscle memory. One only needs to hear a slide whistle or a rim shot, and like Pavlov's dogs, we often respond with peals of laughter. But Sunday afternoons, now those were truly magical. The house would be empty, and that's when the black and white movies were on. Lauren Bacall, Hedy Lamarr, Al Jolson. The best teenage hangout in my small town, where you'd walk in, request a 78, and slip into one of the listening booths to hear the top 100 Billboard hits like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Spinning Wheel, the Fifth Dimension's version of Aquarius, and Neil Diamond, was Paul's Record Shop. When it closed, to everyone's dismay, my parents outfitted the family room with a Bang & Olufsen sound system and a Nakamichi tape deck. The sound was epic. I would listen to Your School's Namesake until the grooves in the records were worn out, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, Barbra Streisand, Burt Bacharach, Robert Redford and Paul Newman were the biggest movie stars in the world, and I found this album in my parents' cabinet from 1969, the same vintage as Spinning Wheel and Aquarius, from the film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, composed by Bacharach and Hal David. Raindrops keep falling on my head would win the Oscar for Best Song and became the earworm in 1969. In college, I was introduced to politics via Kurt Weill. My first and second professional jobs when I moved to the Big Apple were at the Met. Jesse Norman and Samuel Ramey were performing Bartok's Bluebeard's Castle, and I had the small walk-on role as Knight. I would go on to understudy a nude role in Philip Glass's opera. Thank goodness I never had to go on. Only later would I learn that all of these musical giants, the soundtrack to my life as a young starving artist slinging hash and pounding the pavement, from Harold Arlen to Bob Dylan, were Jewish. I mean, Barbra Streisand defined her seismic voice in Funny Girl in a broad Jewish characterization of Fanny Bryce, a role I would go on to play. I never did play Marmalstein, there's still time. But the sonic landscapes of all these composers and musicians didn't announce their Jewishness in the way klezmer music did, with vivid accuracy. These icons, including Rodgers and Hammerstein, would always make my heart and soul feel like they were familiar relatives, familiar like my grandma Sylvia, who whistled while making brisket for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The older I got, the more my identity was rooted in theater. So I married a Presbyterian man who was inclined toward The Who. I was a Led Zeppelin groupie myself. But we hired Barrett Deems to conduct his 30-piece swing orchestra for our wedding, while I walked down the aisle to Cavaliera Rusticana. When we became parents, Rusty in Orchestraville, Peter and the Wolf, and the musical genius of Danny Kaye, staples of my childhood, would bathe our children's nursery. Our babies grew, as they do, went off to college, and I found myself enrolled here at UCLA in 2015 in the School for Theater, Film, and Television to pursue my MFA in acting. This is where I met Jonathan Snipes, a music professor here on campus. We first worked on a reading of a play with the classics department and eventually spent more time during a production of Friedrich Dürrenmatt's morality play, The Visit. Jonathan's textured and layered soundscapes for the live theater were breathtaking. So naturally, he was my first phone call when I was searching for a composer for UnBroken. Not to be confused with the 2014 film of the same title about Olympic runner Louis Zamperini. My documentary film, UnBroken, which I directed, produced, and wrote, is about 7 Jewish siblings who were hidden for 2 years during the Holocaust. I am the daughter of the youngest sibling. My quest was to go on a journey to uncover all the upstanders along the way who enabled my family's survival, without whom I would not be standing here talking to you today. So when I tell you that we would eventually launch on Netflix on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, 1 year ago this coming Thursday, and rank number 5 in the top 10 films in the US, my identity as a Jewish woman became full circle in the proudest FU to everything Hitler and the Third Reich was trying to eradicate. The domino effect of our overwhelming film festival run, which began with our world premiere on October 8th, 2023, was profound. But back to making my movie and the sonic choices that illuminate our story. I had acted in many movies, but I had never made a movie. I had filmed my journey, so now my quest was figuring out how would I guide you into a vanished world embodying resonance that persists in narratives marked by rupture and displacement. I gave myself some non-negotiables to create the period authentic, aesthetically and ethically. The music needed to be original compositions created specifically for the Weber siblings' journey. And these scores needed to be recorded live with musicians in concert. Collaborating with Jonathan became an opportunity to think intentionally about how sound can convey inherited memory, dislocation, resilience, and subtle textures of Jewish life, steeped in both fear and resilience and hope. Specifically, what would my voice have to offer? I didn't survive the Shoah, and I also didn't grow up with any of the stories. That is until my mother had reunited with her German siblings in 1984. In 1994, my uncle Alphonse would write a 40-page document, The Brief History of the Weber Siblings, the first time anyone in the family ever put pen to paper and wrote down their memories.
I'm grasping for shadows, places they played, places they disappeared. And I'm searching for their building, which doesn't even exist anymore.
So what we're looking for is 31 Grenadierstrasse.
Yeah.
So which one do you think it is?
Probably the left side.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You live in this building?
Yeah. Can you open this door for us? Yeah.
Really?
My first recollections go back to this small apartment. Just 2 simple rooms forming an L-shaped area.
The old building may be gone, but the courtyard remains, a world all its own. with scattered shards from the past. What was it that enabled my family to defy the odds when so many others couldn't?
I'd like you to hear a little bit from our lead editor, Aaron Safin.
There's a few things that I think the scene is a great example of in the film, and one of them is thinking about Beth's voice. And, conversations we had early on when we started working together were, what is the role of Beth's character? Because it's only a portion, it's an angle of Beth. It's obviously not her entire perspective. And you know, Beth had a very strong feeling that this was not her story, and what we were trying to figure out and articulate was what is the value of her role as a tour guide? What does it do for the viewer? How is she a stand-in for people who are second generation children of survivors, for people trying to navigate family history in different ways? And how can she help us understand the meaning of it? And in this scene in particular, you've got her narration, and then you also have Alphonse's words from a few different documents that he wrote, piecing together the family's story. And that's part of her search and her journey, but they have very different perspectives. You know, Alphonse telling his own story and trying to keep the record alive, and Beth grasping for something that was never quite her experience, but also belonged to her in a big way.
And here are a few words from our composer, Jonathan Snipes, who actually is very sorry he can't be here today. He's teaching right now.
This cue is fun for, so this cue doesn't feature the string players, doesn't feature the string quartet. It's piano and woodwind and synthesizer, and then also field recordings of contemporary Berlin, about as close as I could find to that area. And a lot of the things that I think an audience might consider to be sound design in the clip that was just shown are actually things that I made and that I consider to be part of the score, and were things that I'd sort of existed very early on, of sort of how we would get in and out of the sort of contemporary sound of that courtyard, and in and out of these kind of beds of hiss, again, speaking about these layers of memory and these artifacts. An anecdote I'm sure I shared at some point in this process, and a memory of mine, an imperfect memory of mine that I'm not sure ever happened, that informed my whole life and career in aesthetic and taste, is I have a memory as a teenager of watching the news with my mother and seeing this sort of nonsensical puff piece about an old adobe courthouse in Texas, that there was this legend that because of the way the walls were built, sound was trapped forever inside of it, and people would journey to this courthouse and use a stethoscope to listen to the walls and could hear old gavels being struck and verdicts being read and things echoing from hundreds of years ago. And I don't remember if this news story existed. I certainly don't think this is true, but it has become a guiding principle for how I think of place in the work that I do as a sound designer and a composer, because I would love for it to be true. And so thinking about the sort of echoes in that courtyard, and also thinking about like the way that sound acoustically moves through a space, and pieces like a piece that's hugely influential for me is Alvin Lucier's I Am Sitting in a Room, where the voice is gradually degraded by playing it back into a room over and over again in this iterative process, and just thinking about what time would do to sound if it never left a space, and it would gradually sort of transform into music. So the swells of the sort of clarinet pulses and the way that the hiss kind of interacts with the tones, and the contemporary field recordings and how they sort of degrade into musical pitches and back and things, are all informed by these ideas. And this film was a really fertile ground for me to play with concepts like that.
So you've seen the scene, and you saw me walk into the courtyard, and one of the questions that I had when I walked into that courtyard was, to the trees, what did the trees see? What did the trees hear? Because that was the only thing that was still original from the time that my mother had lived there. This is from the transcript of the film, and so we'll listen to the piece of music that Jonathan composed without the visuals. I feel that the music operates below conscious recognition, shaping behavioral response and historical imagination. I find myself falling backwards with the piano cadence. The score evokes what I like to call a muscle memory of hope. I'm on this journey hoping to find something. I walk into the courtyard filled with nothing but hope, and I begin to find my voice in true Jewish form with a question. What was it that enabled my family to survive the odds when so many others couldn't? The question emerges not only as accompaniment, but as a carrier of inherited experience capable of bridging past and present. The prolific composer John Adams writes in his colorful autobiography, Hallelujah Junction, about the ability to evoke atmosphere and harmony. Therein lies a work's essential genome, the identifying DNA that gives it character and makes it special and memorable. He goes on to write, our brains are hardwired to seek out and find a musical center of gravity in any complex pitches. Jonathan's sonic world captures danger, oppression, urgency, but also hope. The ritual of coming together to play music is very sacred to me. We all know music is the universal language, and when we break down why that is, I believe it is because it gives us an opportunity to be in relationship with so many things simultaneously. I'm in relationship to what I hear, you're in relationship to what you hear, but together we are in relationship to what we hear collectively. And on a deeper level, these rituals allow us to connect with the seeds of our own souls, that small moment in our interior worlds that recognizes our own humanity, most especially as it connects to all of mankind. It's that place where man's search for meaning is confronted in the bardo. Where does sound end and music begins? Or where does music end and sound begins? That's the place where the questions burn brightest for me. And in that space, melodies sound utterly familiar. You know you have heard it before and you don't know where or when, but it provokes a certain behavior and you are destined to respond. Here is my mother's response.
A thought came to me as I was listening to this music, and it has to do with there's a relentless pulsing underneath the lovely lyrical sound of the music. And that relentless pulsing, it just struck me that that's what was going on during the war. It was this constant drive and a continuation that we could not get away from. We just couldn't.
It's this ritual of storytelling, l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation, once only told around a campfire, the elders sharing wisdom or laughter. And in the 20th century, the golden age of cinema, the ritual of walking up to the box office, muscle memory, buying a ticket, muscle memory, walking inside the theater, finding your seat, the lights dim, muscle memory. And you wait in anticipation of what? The story you didn't know you needed to hear, but here you are. And there is a communal contract to practice the art of listening. Here's Aaron.
Close up on the screen. So what you see here are very early renditions of the animation, just drawn with no motion, as we started the process to figure out, as Beth was talking about, how to bring to life these memories, this one from Ruth, but many others from Ginger, Bela. And in doing so, we really were trying to engage with the question of what is real here. Memory is not fact. It is a person's interpretation and what they've held on to and how to pull out the most important things, but also give that sense of grasping that is innate to memory. And so in this slide, you see 4 moments of Ruth and Bela walking into the movie theater. And what I want you to see here and pay attention to when we watch the clip in a few minutes is think about the relationship between the two of them and how each of their experiences is different. Their memories of these things may be different, and how we're trying to bring that out in what is a relatively minor articulation of something that would have been so vibrant in person. And so here we are in the theater itself, and again, thinking about the same things, thinking about how the two of them are interacting with each other, their relationship. And then also take a look at the background, at the walls. When we see this in motion in a few minutes, what I want you to pay attention to is how the motion within the fabric of the scene affects our feeling of memory. And also how the transitions between the interviews, you see Ruth here in the bottom right corner, and the animation itself, how that affects our sense of recalled memory and what that means to you when you're watching the film. And as we begin to move toward watching this in action to recreate it, I'm going to toss it to Jonathan, the composer, to walk you through a little bit of what the creation of the music was like here.
I forget if we said I was going to talk about the music before we showed the little behind the scenes clip. Maybe I'll talk for a second and then we can watch that clip. But talking about memory is something that's really like it's very common to me in my work. I actually have a lot of my formal training is as a sound designer rather than a composer, and I come from a theater sound world. That's how I met Beth, is doing theater sound and working on theater projects together. And I'm constantly in this dialogue between the concrete and the abstract in my work, and what are the concrete sounds of the natural sounds of our reality, and what are the abstracted emotional reflections of those sounds that are usually the sort of the musical content of a project. And thinking about memory and also thinking about media, because this is a film in which a lot of the memories are sort of displayed by seeing different kinds of media, whether that be archival footage or animated reenactments. And this scene is particularly fun because it has a sort of media within a media of a memory, where you see a film within an animation. So we have these sort of layers of media that to me are metaphors for layers of memory. And one really sort of obvious way that I chose to attack this in the music, right, is using sort of the artifacts and degradation inherent in old media and in old technology as a sort of memory, as a sort of metaphor for imperfect memory, right? That we hear things through hisses and crackles and tape warble and these artifacts of the past. So this cue, the music cue in this, starts very, very, very small and sort of tinny and old, feeling like a memory. And then when we move into the film within the memory, it sort of explodes, both with a key change, a transition from sort of staccato movement to legato and sustained movement, and also this peeling away these sort of artifacts, compression artifacts and degradation artifacts. I think that the clip you're going to show is a behind the scenes of us recording it with the string quartet.
And now we'll blend them, we'll merge them all together.
I ran from a lot of that stuff because it was so painful. And why it would affect me more than it would the others, I don't know. Alphonse knew what was going on. Zenta knew what was going on. Me, I was like a blind bat.
Ruth used to drag me to the movie theater and plop me down in a seat in the movie theater.
Oh, God, I love movies. I stole money to go to the movies. The last movie I saw in Berlin was My Große Liebe, My Great Love.
Was ist? Darf ich dir nicht einen Kuss geben? Das ist ja damals so.
Thoroughly out the movie star.
Ich kann also den Platz in der Kuriermaschine nach Berlin haben.
When you were in a public eye, you had to please Hitler. Oh, she was in love with Hitler. But at the time, I didn't know that and didn't care, as long as it wasn't me.
So a movie within a movie within a movie. How would I capture the point of view of children sneaking into the movies, coming from the mouths of 80 and 90-year-old women being interviewed? Well, that's when those Saturday morning marathons of cartoons came into the picture. And like the music, how could I avoid familiar or liturgical Jewish motifs, the risk of illustration versus evocation? How could I shape your response without signaling ethnicity overtly? What the audience absorbs without knowing it, and at the same time, the ethics of recreating a world that has been largely erased. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor, I had the added responsibility of thinking about earning the respect of the murdered, of the saviors, and the upstanders. Of the murdered, of the survivors, and the upstanders, most of whom were Christian. And I did not incline toward Marc Chagall-type drawings or Tevye the Milkman. I mentioned to you that a week ago, last Monday, in honor of Yom HaShoah, or actually I didn't mention it to you, but I think I mentioned that last year we released the film on Yom HaShoah. And of course, the date changes every year. So last Monday, on Yom HaShoah, we had a nationwide watch party. This means that we published the press release, we blasted social media, we sent out our newsletters, and across the nation, our fans turned on Netflix and rewatched UnBroken. My husband and I did the same thing, but we muted our television and turned on the computer to watch the director's cut of the film that we completed in 2022. The title was Would You Hide Me? We had applied to boatloads of festivals and didn't get in anywhere. 6 months later, we landed our sales agent who gently poked us to do the nasty business of opening up the edit, a cinematic autopsy, if you will. Painful, sometimes necessary. So last Monday, 3.5 years after the autopsy, my husband and I did watch Would You Hide Me? And I'm very pleased to have the violinist Adam Milstein and clarinetist Max Kaminsky, arranged so graciously by Neil Stolberg, to play for you a piece of music that Jonathan composed, we recorded, and then in classic Hollywood fashion, we left on the cutting room floor. Thank you so much. I really was so thrilled and grateful that both of you were able to pull yourselves away from your very busy schedules and come and play for us today. Thank you. But I think that live performance really does prove my theory as to why I had to have live music recorded for the film, which is not customary for indie filmmakers that are making documentaries. Who has a budget for that? But it was something that was just terribly important to me so that you could hear the sounds that the families heard in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. In the same way that the violin evokes a memory of hope, a remembering the clarinet carries an embodied resonance. What can be happy and gay like Benny Goodman can also be tragic, unresolved, and genuinely open. I shared that my quest was to go on a journey to discover who might have helped my family defy the odds. But once I learned some facts, what would I do with them? I realized I was providing for myself opportunities to exercise my muscles of empathy and compassion. So it became my thesis to prove that through music, cinema, and storytelling, I could give you those same opportunities. How do we as members of society practice our humanity? In rehearsal rooms dotted along the piney shores of Pine Lake and Duck Lake? Perhaps rewatching home movies.
In the meantime, Papa had remarried. She was a widow with a daughter the same age as Bela. And there was a new child, a half-brother, Harry. In 1956, 10 years after we were separated, Papa finally came to this country.
Judy at that time was working at the University of Chicago, and she got him an interview. They had gotten a piece of equipment from Germany, so it was all in German, and they needed somebody that knew German. So sure enough, there was Papa.
Surviving the war, being able to immigrate into the United States, and starting an unbelievably good new life. These are true miracles.
By that time already was involved with my own child, and he had his own life to live. So we saw him, but not that much.
I did not know at the time that they lived on the South Side, Papa and his new wife. Grandma and Grandpa Spiegel and I had just left a Chinese restaurant, and we're walking down 71st Street, and I see a man and his wife and two children, a boy and a girl, walking the opposite directions. And as we passed each other, I remember looking at the man and then turning around and looking at him again, and he was looking at me. And so we stared at each other, but we never spoke. I felt this tremendous loyalty to my American parents. That's what kept me from reconnecting. And then he died in 1970. I hadn't seen him in almost 20 years.
Throughout this whole scene, we're pulling in so many different layers of material, interviews from the present, interviews from the past, video footage, photos, and I think what we wanted to do here was figure out how to put these versions of Ginger and Alexander from different moments, different generations into the same space together. Just in the same way that Ginger and Alexander were standing next to each other on the street, was there a way in which we could put them together on screen? And maybe we won't be able to put it up, but there's a moment. Here it comes. There's a moment where you can see both of them at the same time, and that was really what we were looking to create here, was that fuzziness of what does it mean for them to be in this space together, in this moment together, to create kind of a third time. There it is, right there.
Yeah, right.
Where they can recapture that moment, and we can share that with them.
The archival footage, it's pink. It's pink because that's what happens to 8mm film sometimes. We didn't add that. When I saw the footage and working with Jonathan on how he layers sound and uses the field recordings, I felt that this was a visual field recording eroded over time and supported by the music that Jonathan composed. This very melancholy clarinet whistle punctuating the sound surface. It all tied to the subtext of my mother's personal narrative, evoking a sense of deep, unknowable mystery in the compressed space of seeing her father, recognizing the familiar, and allowing the vulnerability take over as they both walk away, moving on with their American lives. Lives filled with memories, lives filled with hope for a better tomorrow. The mission of the Weber Family Arts Foundation, as Catherine very generously pointed out, the nonprofit that I established to both produce UnBroken, but most importantly, to honor my family and their saviors. The mission is to combat anti-Semitism, bigotry, and hate through the arts by sharing stories of hope. And as you have learned, I am a firm believer in the muscle memory of hope. And I hope you are proud owners of the muscle memory of hope. But can we together, in ritual, strengthen our collective muscle memory of hope? I promised you all something different today. This will sound familiar to you. And when you do recognize it, I invite you to open your hearts, maybe even rise up out of your chairs, and most definitely open your mouths and sing a story of hope with me. When all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all around, heaven opens a magic lane. You know the words. When all the clouds darken up the skyway, there's a rainbow highway to be found, leading from your window pane to a place behind the sun, just a step beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, started talking to Jonathan, oh gosh, at the beginning of the edit, knowing that we couldn't quite compose yet because we didn't have the, we had the building blocks, but we didn't know how we were going to tell the story yet. And particularly when it comes to animation, and we do have a couple of animated scenes that are on the cutting room floor as well, but animation is so expensive that you don't want to compose music for a piece of animation that then is not going to be used. And so to me, it's just tragic that we weren't able to keep that gorgeous clarinet, which is actually was composed for cello and clarinet in the film. So Jonathan really came in after we had what we called really the very, very last rough assembly. And then he was able to start to build everything. But we've been talking about it for a long time, and then we finally had to kind of press go. Is that helpful? I mean, we edited most of it first while we were having these conversations, so that he literally did compose the music for the scenes that we built. And so he would throw us some samples of things, and we would say, yeah, you're kind of on the right track, but there really was a moment of saying, okay, now you can go. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. Thank you very much for this. Very much looking forward to watching your film once I hold the conference. But what I wanted to share was last week I showed my undergraduate students in Kansas to a play called Dedication, which was also by a second-generation Holocaust survivor, and it was his multimedia attempts to tell his family story. And so I'm wondering if you might be able to situate UnBroken within the larger context of second-generation projects to memorialize a family's encounter with the Holocaust, if there's others you're aware of right now.
I mean, there are many films that are created by second-generation Holocaust survivors, and one of the clips that I skipped over for time was hearing my mother talk about why our film is different. Because I think that many people really kind of live in that space of bombing raids, all the historical things that so many people do know about, and now we have generations of students that don't know about it, and so you want to teach Holocaust history. But I think of UnBroken truly as Holocaust 301 and not 101. Although we're not a history lesson, we do have a learning guide. It's a beautiful learning guide. And I put a couple, they're free. You can download them off of our website, which is unbrokenthefilm.com, or you can go to the Weber Family Arts Foundation.com or bethlane.com. They all work together. But the learning guide focuses on upstanders and what it means to be an upstander, and exercise of the muscles of empathy and compassion. And that's the work that we're doing right now, that I think oftentimes other second-generation Holocaust survivors aren't taking the material and putting it into the context of what we're experiencing today. But I think for all of us as a Jewish community, we're experiencing something that we weren't anticipating. And so we have to flex with that. And I'm very sorry to say that UnBroken becomes more relevant each and every day. So I could give you a list, if you like, of other second-generation stories. But the stories that were my true north and that I actually used to help me create UnBroken were from first-generation survivors. Of course.
And yeah, quick question. Thanks, that's just really wonderful in a lot of ways. I wanted to speak a little bit more about what specifically it is about live music that make you want to give it a mention as a plan important. I mean, I think I know why I like live music, but I want to know why specifically you want it for the film.
You know, I often hear people talk about performances through the lens of emotion. And as an actor, I want to reframe that for everybody, because acting is imaginary behavior in real circumstances. So it's the behavior that is elicited when I hear a piece of live music that I wanted to create for all of you and give you a chance to explore what is the behavior do to you, because emotions are a result. So what is it behind the emotions that's happening? How are you behaving now when you hear live music? What does it actually do to you? Does it make you have the hair stand up on the back of your neck? Does it make you want to jump off your sofa and go out and be an activist? Who knows what it does? But for me, that's what live music has always given me, a portal into understanding what's going on inside of my internal world. Yes. We can. Thank you. Because I'm not accustomed to conferences and giving papers, I neglected to really say thank you for having me today. I'm so grateful to be here. It's been very inspiring hearing everyone speak. And Daniela, you've just done such an extraordinary job pulling all of us together. And I want to thank Michael and Mark and Neil and everybody for having me attend. Thank you very much.